Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Now we'll get right to the business of Inquisition Update and continue our reading and discussion of the book, The Global Vatican, by former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney. We're going to take an inside look at the Catholic Church, world politics, and the extraordinary relationship between the United States and the Holy See. This book describes what most people don't recognize the Bible describes. Revelation chapter 13. The first beast, that is the Roman beast, the papacy, and its mirror image, the wilderness beast, the second beast that rose up out of the wilderness, where the gospel had never been preached. And that is the United States of America. And it causes the whole world to worship the first beast. Okay, highly recommend this book. You can get it from Rowman and Littlefield and other major book outlets. Very revealing book. Yesterday we concluded with a discussion of this new pope at the time, Pio IX, or better known as Pope Pius IX, and his apparent initial liberalities. He appeared to be, in the initial stages of his papacy, a liberator. Some even accused, possibly, Pope Pius IX might have been the first Protestant pope. If that's not an oxymoron, I've got a bridge to sell you on the moon. But he initially seemed to favor the opposition to the Roman pontiff. The Roman pontiff, historically, was King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He ruled over the kings of the earth, and he wouldn't share his throne with anyone. And this Pope Pius IX, Pio IX as he was called, seemed to be in favor of the unification of Italy, seemed to be in favor of a republican form of government, thus simply surrendering his monarchical or temporal ruler status. In the papal states, particularly that which is called the patrimony of Peter, the Pope was the direct governor over. And the movement to establish a republican form of government would have stripped the Pope of his temporal domains. In actual fact, Pope Pius IX would no longer have been a king of anything except Vatican City. And it would have gone against, well, the historical basis, the precedent setting of the Pope becoming a temporal ruler. And it was because of the donation of Pepin in the papal states that the Pope got his temporal kingly status that would eventually escalate and extend its boundaries to encompass the whole world. If the Pope would have lost his domains, the papal states, and they would have been thrown into a new temporal government, a republican government with a constitution and rights established for the people, and the people participating in the government rather than the Pope dictating everything. Well, the Pope would be relegated to simply a priest, or Lord of Lords, as it were. And Pope Pius IX eventually woke up to that, well, deadly eventuality. because the Protestant Reformation had already stripped the Pope of his spiritual power over most of Europe. All the Pope had left was his temporal power, and that was being destroyed as well. And the papacy was on its deathbed, as it were. Neither King of Kings nor Lord of Lords. So Pope Pius IX had to have a change of heart somewhere. And I know the Jesuits helped him. History records that this Pope was educated by the Jesuits and controlled by the Jesuits. All right. Now we'll continue backing up just a small paragraph from where we left off yesterday on the program. Metternich, remember Metternich, Prince Metternich of Austria, was a rabid traditionalist. He was a conservative Roman Catholic. He was a Counter-Reformation Council of Trent Catholic. He was Jesuit-controlled from the get-go. He was a burn-em at the stake, monarchical, dictatorial, Roman Catholic king and a tremendous friend of the papacy. A long history of close ties to the papacy. Now, Metternich had warned Pope Pius IX and the papacy what would happen if they ever began to embrace any of these liberal, and I'll use the term Protestant, ideas, that it would topple the entire papacy. And it would also topple the monarchical system that Rome was hopeful to try to, save from destruction. All right, Metternich's warning about liberal popes now came due, because Pius had allowed himself to be cast as a reformer. Here's where we get the idea that Pope Pius IX might have been the first Protestant pope. The Italian revolutionaries naturally assumed that he was in sympathy with their goals. Okay? So all the reformers, the revolutionists, those who wanted to unite all of Europe under a single, let me call it a secular government, because it wasn't Protestant at all. It was just using Protestant ideas. Unify all of Italy. No more papal states. The Pope, if he's to be called king of anything, it's just Vatican City, 108 square acres. Strip him of his temporal crown. Now, he said they expected him to cheer the unification movement and throw his weight into the fight against Austria, which was trying to maintain the monarchical system, which hated liberality because it looked a whole lot like Protestantism. The Pope was losing power. That's what Protestantism is, by the way, if you don't know. We protest the Pope, the Antichrist. Okay? We strip him of his kingly status and his priestly status because he's neither. That's Protestantism. Protestantism says that we are the temples of the Holy Spirit. It is we, if we are guided by the Spirit of Christ and the written Word of God, God is our governor. God is our king. Christ is our liberator from human government. Now, many people would say, well, what about Romans chapter 13? It says, we are to obey the principal power. Where does government get its responsibility? Where does government get its power? From God. But if the government takes more power than God authorizes the civil government, then it's no longer a legitimate government. Look, I know that's not what you're hearing from your pastors in the churches. But look, common sense dictates if our government tells us or makes it law that we violate God's law, then it's no longer a legitimate government. Look, the order set in Romans chapter 13 for the civil power, for the government, the civil government, is to reward good and to punish evil. Read it for yourself. Sounds all well and good, doesn't it? All right, who establishes what is good and what is evil? The government? No, that's not what it says in Romans 13. Not at all. We understand it's God who established what is good and what is evil. So the civil government is to be the servant of God. The Bible is to be its law book. Just like in the government of Israel, when Israel was obedient and blindly administered God's law, there was righteousness in the land and God blessed. And the minute a wicked king stood up and changed what was good and what was evil, and then began to rule over the people with one eye open, considering the person, Israel was cursed. Now, what right do we have to see? We have in seeing the role of civil government in the times of the Gentiles being any different. The civil power is to be the servant of God. God is the lawgiver. The civil power carries the sword not in vain, but to punish wickedness and to reward good. Wickedness as God defines it, and good as God defines it. What we see throughout the Gentile world is a government that has created itself and makes its own laws contrary to the laws of God. And we serve a wicked master. He's a tyrant. He is a tyrant who rewards evil and punishes good. Hasn't that been the whole history of the old world order? To reward evil and to punish the righteous? Same stuff, just different millennium today. Now, to the degree that the papacy controls the lawmaking process and the lawmaking system in this country, our government serves not Christ, but Antichrist. Now, common sense dictates that if our civil power is aligned with Antichrist, that person which calls himself King of Kings and Lord of Lords and the replacement of Christ on the earth, then we serve him when we obey the unjust laws of this civil power. Satan, through the papacy, who says all legitimate governments are vested in the Pope and take their orders from the Pope. Remember, he reigneth over the kings of the earth. That's what the Bible says. To the degree that our government has walked away from Christ and now serves the papacy is the degree to which we are at odds with our own government. Now, Metternich comes from the school that the Pope is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And this Pope has, appeared to surrender that. Of course, Metternich, a monarch himself who enjoys blue blood status and shares with the papacy this so-called divine right to rule, doesn't want a pope sitting on St. Peter's throne in the Basilica at Rome kowtowing to liberal or Protestant ideals. Now, Metternich warned about liberal popes, and now that warning has come due, because Pope Pius IX had allowed himself to be cast as a reformer. The Italian revolutionaries, that's the Democrats or the Republicans, naturally assumed he was in sympathy with their goals. They expected him to cheer the unification movement and throw his weight into the fight against Austria, against monarchism, ignoring the fact that Pius had done little to support these expectations. Simply by appearing sympathetic, he raised the hopes of reformers. So all of Italy is hopeful of a temporal government, not the papacy's. A temporal government of their own making. And Pius IX's got to make a switch. Now it says, the time was that the Pope, a monarch who ruled over much of central Italy, he's talking about the papal states here, could not possibly back a movement that was anti-monarchist and aimed to unify the country. That is, place all of Italy under one government. In other words, strip the Pope of his crown. All right? Doing so would require him to give up the papal states. Not only would this be a betrayal of the church patrimony, the patrimony of Peter they call it, the divine right to be a temporal ruler and to extend his domains to global status, not only would this be a betrayal of the church patrimony handed down to him, remember, King Pepin gave him the papal states, but it would strip him of his temporal sovereignty. He would no longer be a king, much less King of Kings, right? But it would strip him of his temporal sovereignty, which he believed to be critical to his spiritual sovereignty. Remember, the Pope cannot foist his religion upon you unless he is the King of Kings. And he rules and reigns over the kings of the earth, and they, through the civil government, through force of arms, make you Catholic. And if they can't force you into a Catholic church to confess your sins to a sinful man in a confessional box, or if they can't make you eat the Jesus cookie and defile yourself with blasphemy, well, then they can at least make the temporal laws of your land contrary to the law of God and arrest you if you do not obey the Pope, the civil power, and disobey Christ. That's the ultimate goal. To get God's people to assent to laws that are contrary to the law of God and contrary to nature and contrary to common sense. All right? To get us to rebel against our Messiah, against our Creator. Isn't that Satan's job? Indeed it is. And this is how the system works. The Pope is a spiritual leader of Satan's spiritual house. You take whatever spiritual error exists in the world, you'll find it all in a warehouse in a big, ugly church in Rome. They don't care what religion you are as long as you are bound to a civil government that disobeys Christ. All right? That's just the way it is. That's the way Satan works. And he cloaks this all under the name of Christianity. That's why it is so critical for us never, never, never to equate Roman Catholicism with Christianity. I mean, it's come to the point where they've soiled the word Christianity to the point that I can't hardly claim it anymore. When people ask me, "Are you a Christian?" I take a pause. And many times I answer simply, "No, I'm a Bible believer. I do not approve of what has become of Christianity." That's like I said yesterday to one friend that I was talking to. I think the whole purpose of the Roman Catholic Church was to put such an ugly face on Christianity that no one would desire it. That was the whole purpose of the Christian church in Rome. Okay? the Roman Catholic Church. It's not Christianity. It goes by that name. People insist that Catholics are Christians. They love Jesus Christ, but they serve the Pope. And they extend the Pope's power in our civil government. That's why they run for political office. That's why the most powerful positions in our government are occupied by Roman Catholics. Okay? Their king is not Christ. Their king is the quote-unquote vicar of Christ, which means the replacement of Christ, which also means Antichrist. I'm not kidding. Look it up. Look it up for yourself. I make this point so many times I think people just go, their eyes glass over it. It goes over their head. Listen, vicar of Christ literally means, no play with words, no trickery here. Vicar of Christ literally means Antichrist. It's the same word. If you were to address privately the Pope and say, "Hello, Mr. Antichrist," he would have to just nod and shake your hand, because that's his official title. Anytime anybody ever calls him Vicar of Christ, they are acknowledging that he is Antichrist. It's the same word. I'm not playing games here. All you have to do is look it up in the dictionary. All right. Pope Pius IX finding himself in sympathy early on in his papacy with liberal ideas, and he just undermined the whole papacy, let alone the Jesuit-led Counter-Reformation. This is a terrible mistake for the Antichrist to make. To look like a Protestant? Well, let me tell you, it's one of the Jesuits' favorite things to preach behind a Protestant pulpit, to teach lies about the Bible, and to get them to believe in a future Antichrist, which exonerates the entire history of the papacy. That's why the world today is clueless about who the Antichrist is. You walk down the street and ask this person, that person, anybody you want who the Antichrist is, you'll get that many different answers. There was no mistake among the Protestants. You ask a Protestant who the Antichrist is, they look at you like, "Where have you been?" Of course, it's the papacy. Why would you ask such a stupid question? That's what a true Protestant would tell you. Now ask yourself, how many Protestants are there in this country? None. Almost none. It's a more hideous reality than I'm sure most of my listeners comprehend. All right, not only would this be a betrayal of the church patrimony handed down to him, but it would strip him of his temporal sovereignty, which he believed to be critical to his spiritual sovereignty, and it is critical to the spiritual sovereignty of the Pope. The Pope is nothing if he can't be the king of the kings of the earth, because only by force are God's people brought into subjection to the papacy. All right. Nor was he willing to support a war against Austria, a Catholic country long allied with the Holy See. Pius IX might have been willing to tweak the status quo, but he had no interest in overthrowing it. And what was the status quo? Papal rule. All right, realizing he had been misunderstood, Pius now made his position clear. On April 29, 1848, he issued an allocation declaring his opposition to unification of Italy and the expulsion of Austria. That means I'm keeping the Papal States, and I'm going to extend those boundaries across the globe. The Jesuits have promised me the papacy would eventually rule the world. If we give the Jesuits complete control of the papacy, which they now have since Pope Clement XIV issued the bull, and the Protestant Reformation has taken us, and the Enlightenment, the French Revolution has destroyed the papacy, now we are in complete control by the Jesuits. All right, I'm keeping the Papal States, and I'm not going to expel Austria. I'm not going to expel monarchism. I'm not going to let Italy unite under liberal, that is, Protestant ideals. We'll be back right after the message. Welcome back to the second half hour of Inquisition Update. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Please support FirstAmendmentRadio.com, and if you'd like to contact me, please do so by email, tom@seawaves.us. Now look, the Protestant Reformation had done its damage, both to the spiritual and temporal power of the Antichrist. Even the irreligionists of the southern European bloc, the Catholic bloc mostly, was overtaken by the Enlightenment. And though it wasn't Protestant necessarily at all, it was irreligion, but it had the same effect, to destroy the temporal and the spiritual power of the Pope. Now here's Pope Pius IX ready to concede and allow a secular government to unify all of Italy, and even strip the Pope of his papal states, making him just the King of Rome, King of the Vatican. That's it. Pius IX appeared to be one ready to just hand over his temporal crown. No more King of Kings, no more king at all. It looked like the papacy had surrendered in many people's eyes. Not to be. It's not to be. The Antichrist is not done away with that easily. All right, realizing he'd been misunderstood, Pope Pius IX now made his position clear. On April 29, 1884, he issued an allocation declaring his opposition to the unification of Italy and expulsion of Austria. The response to this was instant outrage as revolution-minded Italians turned on the Pope with fury. The Pope all of a sudden said, "I changed my mind. No liberty. We're going back to monarchism. Your revolution in Italy is bound to fail because I am King of Kings and Lord of Lords." And everybody rebelled. Okay, it's getting serious now. It says the unfortunate Jacob Martin, we're back to telling you how we got our first ambassador, as it were. They called him a chargé, but our first true ambassador to the quote-unquote Holy See. All this happened during Martin's elevation to that position. It says, the unfortunate Jacob Martin arrived on August 2nd, 1848, during a wave of canicular heat, it says, to find the city in the greatest agitation and threatened with riot, if not revolution. The Pope was too occupied to see Martin at once, so the American found lodging on the ground floor of a residence near Phoenician Hill and waited. Martin's audience with the Pope finally came on Saturday, August 19th, and Pius IX was cordial in a high degree, it says, and very pleased that the United States had agreed to diplomatic relations. The Protestant nation agreed to diplomatic relations with the Antichrist. You can't read it any other way. A Protestant nation that only had just received liberty for Catholics after the revolution against Great Britain is now seeking diplomatic relations with the Pope. And it says the Pope took Martin's hand and escorted him around one of the Vatican's vast marble-floored salons, speaking first in French and then Italian, the Pope expressing delight at the Americans' presence. Martin expressing admiration for the Pope's, quote, wise and liberal, unquote, policies. Wise and liberal, just at the very time Pope Pius IX was making his about-face and returning to monarchism and overthrowing the rebellion, the liberal rebellion in Italy. Now, the following day, Martin wrote a long letter to Secretary Buchanan noting the quote, imprudent attacks upon the character and office of Pope Pius IX, unquote. He suggested that Italian revolutionaries were recklessly overreaching. Quote, young liberty should not exhaust her efforts against this rock of ages, unquote, wrote Martin. Young Liberty being the French Revolution and the revolution in Italy. And you might well include even the Protestant Reformation, because they all had the same effect of absolutely decimating the power and authority of the papacy. He says young liberty should not exhaust her efforts against this rock of ages. Who was he speaking of when he talked about the rock of ages? Trust me, it wasn't Jesus. It was the Pope. He referred to the papacy as the rock of ages. Quote, she should conciliate what is an immense, if not irresistible, moral power. That is, she, being young liberty, should conciliate what is an immense, if not irresistible, moral power. All right, liberty must succumb to the papacy, this irresistible moral power. He's against it's. This is an American revolution. This is an American representative of the United States to the Holy See, siding with the papacy against liberty, calling the Pope Rock of Ages, an irresistible moral power. Now it says the alliance of freedom and religion were wiser than their conflict, unquote. All right? The alliance of freedom and religion were wiser than their conflict. He's just describing the whole liberal movement, the attempt to unite all of Italy and strip the Pope of his power was suicide, basically. Suicide, to strip the Pope of his power. What does that say for Protestantism? Now, Martin did not seem hopeful that such an alliance would be formed anytime soon, nor would there be much opportunity to pursue American interests in the Papal States at a moment when Rome was, quote, intent now only upon questions affecting its very existence, unquote. That's right. Pope Pius IX nearly signed over the farm. He'd been devastated by fire, Protestant fire, French Revolutionary fire, and was all but consumed. And then appeared initially to be siding with a Republican form of government for all of Italy and simply surrendering his crown. Okay? That is what was fully the preoccupation of the papacy at the time, to save itself and its very existence. Now, the heat and chaos in Rome soon took their toll on Martin. Within days of meeting the Pope, he came down with a serious illness, probably malaria. On the morning of August 26, exactly a week after composing his letter to Secretary Buchanan, Jacob Martin died. It almost sounds like God's judgment, doesn't it? It says the secretary of the legation who visited him just before he collapsed attributed his death to, quote, bad air, unquote, and, quote, Roman fever, unquote. And those are quotes that point the finger at the Jesuits. This author, whether he realizes or not, is suggesting that maybe the Jesuits poisoned him. Okay? Unfortunately, death saved Martin from witnessing what followed in the months and years ahead, events that would have been profoundly disillusioning to him. Relations between the Pope and the liberals continued to deteriorate as summer turned to fall. The breaking point came one November evening a few months after Martin's death. Pope Pius IX's chief minister, Count Pellegrino Rossi, had just stepped out of a carriage in front of the Cancellaria, that is, the council chamber of the Holy See, when he was surrounded by a gauntlet of revolutionaries. A man lunged forward with a knife and stabbed Rossi to death. The following day, a violent crowd descended on the Quirinal Palace. Gunfire rang out. One of the Pope's prelates was shot through a window. The city had become too dangerous for the Pope. A week later, on November 24th, 1848, in a carefully plotted escape involving his valet and several foreign ambassadors, Pope Pius IX disguised himself as an ordinary priest and slipped out of the palace through a secret passage. Antichrist is on the run. Got to escape. Okay? The vicar of Christ, the replacement of the Son of God on earth, has donned just the garb of an ordinary priest and got out the back door. It's a wonder he didn't dress himself up like a nun, like most of the popes do when they get in trouble. It said he fled by carriage over the Alban Hills, leaving the city in the hands of a revolutionary government. He took refuge in a castle at Gaeta, a Mediterranean town 70 miles southeast of Rome. Pius's exile was short-lived. Like many a pope before him, he prevailed upon friends for aid. Not God, friends. Okay? The French responded and won Rome back. Returning to Quirinal Palace in the spring of 1850, Pius was much changed from the youthful man crowned 4 years earlier. Any liberal sentiments he had once indulged were now extinguished. Never again would he entertain such ideas as republicanism, nationalism, or progress, and the author strategically leaves out the word Protestantism included in that list. This pope became thoroughly Jesuitly indoctrinated, returned to Tridentine conservative Roman Catholicism, eventually wrote the syllabus syllabus of error and his encyclical Quanta Cura, and damned every form of liberal government and Protestantism. All right, section 4 of this chapter begins thus. Italian issues dominated his long reign, but Pope Pius IX found time and energy to devote to other church matters. In the ecclesiastical realm, this is where the Pope puts on his spiritual power. In the ecclesiastical realm, he opened more dioceses. There's your shadow government. I mean, you know, if you're going to overthrow liberal governments, you have to have a shadow government in order to do it. So he opened more dioceses than any pope in history. This is part of his war strategy now, to overthrow the revolution, to increase the number of dioceses. Remember what we said about dioceses? They are jurisdictions controlled by the Pope. It's just like counties or states. All right? Shadow government has to have jurisdictions. And over each jurisdiction appointed a governor, one of the priests, one of the bishops of the Roman Catholic Church. And it oversees and keeps the Vatican informed of what the civil power is doing to make sure it serves the Pope. And if it don't serve the Pope, the diocese goes into action. Okay, then they call in the Jesuit provincial for that area. Okay? All right, it's the shadow government. In the ecclesiastical realm, he opened more dioceses than any pope in history. He also pursued a very active diplomacy, signing new concordats with Russia, Spain, Austria, and several Latin American republics, while hosting ambassadors from nations around the world. Okay? Signing contractual agreements with Russia? Yeah. Spain, historically Catholic. Austria, historically Catholic. And several Latin American republics. Okay? Got to stop the spread of Protestantism and quote-unquote liberalism from South America, don't you know? Because I mean, the Pope sent Christopher Columbus to this country to claim this hemisphere for the Pope. See, we got to have the second beast to fulfill Revelation chapter 13. The first beast controlled Europe. The second beast that rose up in the wilderness, it cannot be allowed to become Protestant and liberal. Okay, that's why all of South America is Roman Catholic, Central America is Roman Catholic, Mexico is Roman Catholic, so is Canada. It's just the United States where we have the problem with the Protestants. But America is industrious. Those Protestants like to work. And the Pope's got to get control, ultimate control of that vast wealth and ingenuity and use it to serve him to help conquer the rest of the world for the Pope, the world that had rebelled against the papacy and still poses a threat to a global government. That's the role America prophetically is going to play and has played in history. All right, the United States, too, commanded his attention. Just as Pope Pius IX was the first pope to receive official diplomatic recognition from the United States, he was likewise the first pope to take a serious interest in the young nation. In part, this was a simple matter of arithmetic. Listen carefully. Remember, this author just genuinely downplayed the Protestant cry in the early 19th century about America is becoming Romanized through immigration. Okay, spreading all kinds of unfriendly things about the history of the papacy, and the greatest of all evils to be feared is the Pope and popery. Okay, he said that all these fears were nonsensical, hurtful, not necessary, incorrect. Now listen to what he says. The number of American Catholics was rising rapidly as thousands of Irish and German immigrants flowed into the country. You see what he did? Just typical Roman Catholicism. Out of one side of his mouth, 2 pages previously, he was condemning the Protestants for unfairly accusing American Roman Catholics of favoring all these, this Roman Catholicism flooding into the country from Ireland and Germany. Why, it's just a pipe dream. It's just anti-Roman Catholic bigotry. Here he admits the number of American Catholics was rising rapidly as thousands of Irish and German immigrants flowed into the country. By 1850, 1.75 million Catholics. Remember, in the colonial period, it was less than 1%, and they carefully took every breath. Okay? Now there's 1.7 million Catholics living in the United States. 10 years later, the church doubled, and Catholics comprised 10% of the population. So just in 100 years, we went from just almost non-existent to 10% of the population. Of course, the Protestants, they accused us of trying to Catholicize. The Pope had a plot to overthrow the American government by importing all these Roman Catholics. That was just nonsense. And now here he's admitting 1.75 million Catholics living in the country now raised the Catholic population to 10%. 10%. The largest single religious denomination in the country. Those aren't my words, those are his. Think what it is today. Statistics say Roman Catholicism now occupies 25% of the population. 1 in 4 Americans are card-carrying, baptized Roman Catholics, papists, okay? But that's not all. After Vatican Council II, after believing futurism for about 100 years, Vatican Council II was an ultimatum to the former Protestants, now called separated brethren. You got to come home to mama. You deny now that the papacy is the Antichrist. You believe in a future one. You got to come home to mama church now. Your Protestant rebellion was a joke, and a very, very wicked and evil and destructive joke. You liberated from my righteous rule the vast majority of Europe, and you put the papacy, the very replacement of the Son of God on earth, the representative of God on earth, you put him in his coffin. You Protestants, now ecumenical evangelibellies, you have to restore to me all that you stole from me from the Protestant Reformation. Okay? I want my kingly crown back. I want my spiritual crown back. I want my land back. I want the whole world, because that is the true patrimony of Peter. King of kings and Lord of lords, that's what I want. And you're going to get it for me. And we're going to get Roman Catholics to move to America. We're going to make the agenda, both liberal and conservative in America. Did you know, all of my listeners are political activists. Half of the listeners are aligned with the liberals. Half the listeners are aligned with the Republicans. But you want me to tell you a secret nobody else will tell you? They're both Roman agendas. That's right. The liberals typically tax and spend, promise, gifts from the government, support, help, Social Security, social this, social that. All you got to do is pay more taxes. Anytime you take money out of the hands of God's people and give it into somebody else's hand, you take from the righteous and give to the wicked. You see, if the money's left in your hands, you're allowed to do with whatever God demands and asks you to do with it. Take care of yourself, take care of your mother, take care of your spouse, take care of your sick kids, take care of your damaged property in a storm. But no. You need a nanny, a federal nanny. So you depend on the government. The government becomes your job, your God, okay? And when you give the government the power to become like the Most High, then he dictates your morality. And giving that government the power to tax is giving that government the power to become like the Most High. You've created your own Messiah, basically. You've kicked God out of the whole deal and made the government your manager, your moral. Look, if the government's got the money, they are the moral strength of the country, not the people. You depend on the government for everything. What do you depend on Christ for? Okay? The government takes from the righteous and redistributes it to the wicked. Isn't that what most people are upset about? All these no good do-nothings sitting on their hands, taken from the government, living off the government's coffer? No, they're not living off the government's coffer. They're living off your coffer. The government gets the glory, doesn't it? Where if the money was left in your hands, you could give to the righteous and deny the wicked and give them true moral support, help. The scriptures. All that's done away with. Now, on the other hand, the Republicans, they're the warmongers, the hawks. And they require even more tax money than the socialists, than the liberals and the Democrats. I mean, these technological weapons we have now are so expensive you can't even believe it. So now you got one side of the political ladder making you totally dependent on the Pope or on the government, which is the same thing. The king serves the Pope, dependent upon the Pope for your life, social this, social that. And then you are taxed to death by the right wing to help conquer the rest of the world for the Pope. Can't do it but by force, and force costs money. And nobody knows that better than the papacy. So The sum total of both political parties is to take from you and do whatever they want to do with the money. And that is to restore the papal patrimony all over the globe. Both liberal and conservative are papal agendas. You've been duped. Now it's time to return to the kingdom of God. I hope you understand what I've just told you. If I have to, I'll give example after example after example until it finally sinks in. That's all we have for today on Inquisition Update. Stay tuned for more godly programming, and I'll see you tomorrow.